The air was warm with laughter and soft music. Strings of golden fairy lights draped over the rooftop terrace, casting a festive glow over the smiling faces gathered below. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the background, someone was already filming what they assumed would be a love story. A waiter walked past with a tray of champagne flutes, and Artyom took a deep breath. Now or never. He glanced at her. Marina, radiant in a deep crimson dress that shimmered with every subtle movement. She looked like she belonged here, in the spotlight, glowing under the eyes of colleagues, friends, family. Everyone was here, except the truth. Artyom stepped forward, slowly lowering himself onto one knee. The music faded into the background, conversation stopped. Marina turned, her eyes widening as he pulled out the small velvet box. Gasps, applause. Cameras lifted, smiles bloomed around them. Then she froze. Her hand flew to her mouth, not from joy. Her breath caught like a snagged zipper. She leaned down, and in a whisper, just for him, the words shattered everything. I can't, not after what I did last night. The world didn't hear her, but he did. The applause continued, awkward and confused, like an audience clapping for an illusion they didn't yet realize had disappeared. Marina stood there, trembling, her eyes pleading for something, forgiveness, escape, understanding. But Artyom only stared, still kneeling, box still open, ring still gleaming. He could feel the cameras on him, could feel the heat rise in his chest and settle like fire behind his ribs. He stood up slowly, each movement deliberate, calm, unnatural. He closed the box. "Friends," he said, voice low but steady. "I've changed my mind." A beat. This isn't the moment. A smile, tight, dignified, ghosted across his face. "Thank you for coming. Sorry to disappoint." And he walked away. People parted as he passed, their faces masks of stunned confusion. Marina didn't follow. She couldn't move. Not yet. In a matter of seconds, Artyom's entire world had collapsed. But he didn't fall with it. The cameras would capture a man who seemed calm. But inside, everything was unraveling. Later, some would say he was brave. Others would whisper about what really happened. Marina's friends would say it was all a mistake. Her colleagues would gossip about her dress, how it seemed too perfect, too planned. And the videos, they would go viral before morning. But for Artyom, none of that mattered anymore. Something had cracked, something had changed. And somewhere deep inside him, a voice he'd long ignored finally spoke. This is not the end, this is the beginning. The city buzzed on, oblivious. But Artyom was nowhere. In the days following that night, his phone remained dark. Messages poured in, friends, colleagues, even Marina, but none were answered. Social media speculated, argued, twisted the narrative. Some clips of the rooftop proposal reached millions. Headlines speculated everything from a publicity stunt to a tragic love story. But Artyom had vanished. He wasn't running, he was processing. Somewhere far from the city lights, tucked into a rented cabin by a quiet lake, he let the silence work on him. No music, no distractions, just the ache in his chest and the question that refused to stop spinning. How long had she been lying? Not just that night, but before. There had been signs, subtle ones, a hesitation in her voice when she spoke of the future, a restlessness in her eyes during quiet evenings, that constant chase for something more, even when she claimed to be content. He remembered how she'd once laughed about a friend who got bored in her relationship and needed a little chaos to feel alive. Was that what Marina wanted too, chaos? A few days into his self-imposed exile, a friend from work, Irina, broke the silence. She didn't text. She showed up. "I'm not here to force answers," she said, holding out a bag of groceries. "But I saw the video. I saw her face." She left the groceries and a printed sheet of paper, a screenshot, messages, the kind you never want to see. Words filled with heat, with familiarity, dates, times, a name. Vlad? Artyom stared at it, heart pounding in slow, painful beats. Vlad, the charming ex she claimed to be so, over. The one she described as a phase, a mistake, the past. Apparently the past liked to text at 2:37 a.m. with phrases like, "You always come back to me." That's when the numbness cracked and anger slipped in, not the violent kind, but a cold, sobering fire. He didn't scream, he didn't break anything. Instead, he opened his laptop. He didn't want revenge, not the petty kind. He wanted clarity. He needed to understand where he had ended and someone else had begun. And so he began to create. He called the new project Obman, deception. At first, it was sketches, abstract, bleeding colors and splintered shapes, but soon it took form, a multimedia installation that mirrored the anatomy of betrayal. each piece a metaphor. A rose cast in resin, cracked at the stem. A dinner table set for two, but with one chair overturned. A video loop of a hand reaching out, never grasped. And at the center, an object he couldn't part with yet. The ring. Still in its box, untouched, not discarded, not glorified, just placed as if waiting for context. Back in the city, Marina was unraveling in a different way. Whispers followed her in hallways. Her friends had questions she couldn't answer without shame. Even Vlad, smug and self-assured, began to keep his distance. He hadn't signed up for this. Public scrutiny, social fallout. She texted Artyom. He didn't block her. He didn't respond either. She wrote again, a message short and almost cowardly in its softness. I'm sorry. I wasn't ready. You deserved more. A week passed. Then came his reply, and I became more without you. Artyom didn't plan for Abman to become public. It began as a private purge, his therapy, a language only he could understand, fractured forms, bleeding edges, textures that hurt to touch. But as the project grew, so did something inside him, the desire not for vindication, but for connection. He wasn't the only one betrayed. He wasn't the only one who felt shattered. And maybe if he could turn pain into art, someone else would see it and say, me too. By the time the installation was ready, the whispers had already begun. Rumors of a mysterious artist who turned heartbreak into haunting beauty. He booked a local gallery, small, intimate, enough space for 20 people, maybe 30. But on opening night, over 200 showed up. People stood in lines wrapping around the block. A stranger whispered, this is the guy, the one from the proposal video. Someone else replied, he turned it into art? Damn. Inside, Abman unfolded like a slow confession. The centerpiece, a looping projection of hands brushing but never meeting, set to a soundscape of quiet city noises, murmured apologies, and breaking glass. One wall featured hundreds of printed texts, fragmented sentences, real messages, rearranged into abstract poetry. It didn't mean anything. I just needed to feel something. You're perfect. That's the problem. Each piece had no names, no direct accusations, but the emotion bled through every detail. In one corner, a sculpture drew the most attention, a hollow human form made from woven wires, holding something small in its open palm. Viewers leaned in. A ring, a real one. No plaque, no description, just the unspoken weight of it. Artyom never appeared in the footage, but those who had seen the viral proposal video recognized the ring instantly. The story was all over social media within days. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, flooded with reactions. The guy turned his heartbreak into a masterpiece. This is what healing looks like. Better than revenge. This is transcendence. People began tagging each other. You need to see this. Journalists picked it up. Influencers visited. A well-known curator offered to move the installation to a larger space. Artyom said yes, not for the fame, but because the story was no longer just his. And yet, at the center of it all, he remained silent. He didn't do interviews, didn't post explanations. He let the work speak. He let people project their own stories onto his. And that's when Marina finally saw it. She'd been trying to stay off the internet. The backlash from the rooftop video had been rough. People quick to judge, strangers labeling her with hashtags, commentators dissecting her body language. Woman, that hit differently. But it wasn't an attack. It was a mirror. She walked through the gallery 2 weeks after the launch, dressed down, unrecognizable in a hoodie and sunglasses, but as soon as she entered, she knew this was for her, or rather, because of her. She moved from piece to piece like a ghost walking through a graveyard she didn't expect to exist. Some visitors cried, some stood in silence. One girl whispered to her friend, this feels like what my mom went through, like exactly. Huh? And Marina, the woman who had always feared boredom, always chased intensity, found herself speechless in front of a sculpture that looked too much like the hollow space she felt inside. At the exit, there was a guest book. People had scribbled notes. Thank you for making me feel seen. You reminded me that it's okay to walk away with my dignity. I was gonna go back to him, then I saw this. Marina didn't write anything, what could she say? She left the gallery and walked 4 blocks without direction before finally pulling out her phone. One message, she didn't expect a reply. I saw the installation. I don't have words. I'm sorry, truly. I didn't know you could become this version of you. I was so busy chasing excitement, I never realized I already had something rare. She hit send. The three dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. His reply was short. You didn't break me, you revealed me. She stared at the words for a long time, realizing he meant it, realizing perhaps for the first time that she was no longer the main character in his story. She was just the spark that lit the match, and he was the fire. Artyom watched from the shadows, not in hiding, not anymore, but from the balcony of the second floor at the newly expanded exhibition hall. The Obman installation had been moved into a larger industrial space in the city's art district, transformed into something immersive. It no longer whispered. It breathed. There were no velvet ropes, no polished plaques, just raw textures, scattered symbolism, and people, dozens of them, moving slowly, reverently, as though walking through someone else's memory, which, in a way, they were, but not his anymore, not entirely. Artyom's story had become a prism. Everyone saw something different through it. A girl grieving her first breakup, a woman reclaiming her voice, a man holding on to a thread of self-worth after being discarded. He didn't speak at the opening, didn't stand for photographs, but his presence lingered in every detail, not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as someone who had rebuilt himself quietly while the world watched. One piece had been added. A small screen tucked in a dim corner of the gallery, looping a muted video of the rooftop proposal, the moment the world first saw him kneel and fall. But this version was edited. The colors faded from vibrant to grayscale as the proposal unfolded, and as he stood up to leave, instead of cutting away, the footage continued. The rest of the moment, the crowd parting, the ring box still in his hand, his silent walk through a corridor of stunned faces. Then, a fade to black. A final title card appeared. This wasn't the end, it was the first honest beginning. The first time he'd watched it, even he had to take a breath. Because it wasn't revenge. It was closure. People began writing about Obman as more than just an art exhibit. Thought pieces, college essays, therapy discussion groups. A professor from a local university described it as one of the most emotionally articulate reflections on public humiliation and personal reinvention in modern art. One night, an email arrived from a woman named Dasha, a curator from Vienna, offering to feature Obman in an international exhibition called The Anatomy of Silence. The theme was transformation after betrayal. Artyom responded with a simple yes. Let it speak where I can't. Meanwhile, life trickled back in. He returned to his studio, took on projects, met friends for coffee again, real friends, the ones who didn't ask intrusive questions but left space for whatever he was ready to share. He no longer avoided the city center. In fact, one weekend, while walking along a sunlit boulevard, he passed a busker playing an acoustic cover of The Night We Met. The song didn't break him. It didn't even sting. He paused, dropped some coins in the guitar case, and smiled. Healing wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with a triumphant shout. It arrived slowly, like morning light. Unnoticed until you realized you weren't walking in the dark anymore. Then came the interview request. A podcast called The Turning Point reached out. They wanted him to talk about Obman, not the gossip, not the proposal, but the deeper arc of how vulnerability had become vision. He almost declined, but something in the way the host phrased it stuck with him. We don't want to talk about the pain, we want to talk about what you built from it. So he said yes. In a quiet recording studio with soft lights and no audience, he sat across from the host and for the first time spoke aloud the words he'd only written. I think a lot of us mistake love for certainty, he said. We fall for the idea of someone, not the actual person they reveal themselves to be, and when that illusion breaks, we think we're broken. But really, we're just raw, finally real. The host asked him what the hardest part had been. Forgiving myself, he said after a pause, not for being in love, but for silencing my instincts, for noticing the signs and pretending they meant nothing. I wanted it so badly to be real, I ignored when it clearly wasn't. And now, the host asked. He smiled. Now I see love as something quiet, not a performance, not a chase, it's presence and truth. The episode aired the following week. It went viral within hours. Not because of scandal, but because of stillness. Because people were tired of rage and hungry for peace. Marina, somewhere in her own unraveling life, listened to it too. Oh, she didn't cry this time. She didn't message him. She just sat alone in her apartment, realizing too late that he had become something she never truly understood. Someone who didn't need her to define him. He had outgrown the pain, and she was still chasing echoes. In the final days of the exhibition, Artyom visited Obman one last time. He wandered alone, hands in pockets, nodding gently as he watched strangers engage with the work. He didn't tell anyone who he was. At the exit, a teenage boy with headphones wrote in the guest book. Sometimes we think our story ends when someone leaves, but maybe the story starts when we stop begging them to stay. Artyom closed the book softly and walked into the evening light free. It had been almost a year. The rooftop looked the same, fairy lights still strung between the wooden beams, now weathered by sun and wind. Someone had rented the venue for a summer art and wine event, and it was open to the public for the evening. Artyom didn't come for the wine or the socializing. He came for himself. He stood alone near the edge of the terrace, the city stretching around him like an unfinished sketch. Below, lights blinked and faded like quiet heartbeats. The hum of traffic was distant. Above, the sky was charcoal blue, stars barely peeking through the haze. He took a slow breath. This was the same place where his old self had shattered, where a dream had cracked mid-sentence, the place of cameras, applause, and betrayal, but now it was just a rooftop. Nothing more. The weight of it had vanished. In his coat pocket, something small clicked as he shifted. The ring? He hadn't worn it, of course, hadn't even looked at it in months. After Obman was archived and moved to international galleries, the ring had come back to him, placed in a small padded envelope with a note from the curators. Whatever this symbol meant once, it's yours now. Do with it what feels right. He pulled it out now, the velvet box still intact, though the edges had worn slightly. He opened it. The ring sat there quiet. Not accusing, not grieving, just metal. He walked to the center of the terrace. There, next to a low wooden bench, was a new planter, part of the venue's recent renovations. Wildflowers spilled from it in bursts of yellow and violet. With careful fingers, Artyom knelt, not as a proposal, not in pain, and tucked the ring, still in its box, into the soil beneath the blossoms. He didn't bury it. He just placed it there gently, like returning a stone to a river. No drama, no audience, just one man letting go. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. It was Irina. She didn't say anything at first, just came to stand beside him, her arms folded loosely, eyes scanning the skyline. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. She followed his gaze to the ring resting in the dirt. "That yours?" "Was," he replied. Irina tilted her head. "Looks good there, like a seed someone forgot they planted." He smiled. "It was never meant to bloom the way I imagined, but that doesn't mean it was wasted." They stood there for a while in silence, the kind that feels full, not empty. Finally, she nudged his shoulder gently. "You ever think about starting over?" Artyom didn't answer right away. He looked out over the city, thinking about all that had happened, the version of himself who once mistook love for permanence, the version who begged silently for someone to stay, the one who stood here a year ago, waiting for a yes that never came. "I don't think I need to start over," he said quietly. "I just need to keep going, from here, as I am." Irina smiled. "Good answer." He turned to her, face calm. "Besides," he added, "the beginning isn't the kneeling or the leaving. The beginning is when you stop apologizing for surviving." And with that, he stepped back from the planter, brushed the soil from his hands, and walked toward the staircase, toward whatever came next. Not as a broken man, but as one who had been rebuilt, not in spite of heartbreak, but through it. The sky above held no signs, no shooting stars, no divine signals, just peace, and that was more than enough.